Hello everyone. This is a project which is very initial stage. I'm going to present some motivated facts. So first, the motivation for this project comes from the sea level rise that's starting in Indonesia. So as some of you would know, Indonesia is one of the fourth most populous country in the world. This has 10th largest economy, but almost 98% of its population is located within the coastline, 100 kilometers of the coast. And most of its economic development centers are located in two islands, which are the islands of Java and Sumatra. And you will also see that historically, these islands have been the ones which have been worst hit in Indonesia. Apart from that, the floods have been increasing in Indonesia over the time period. So overall, these are the regencies, which are, you could think of these as some sort of districts in Indonesia. And overall, technically, the floods have been increasing in Indonesia. So in this paper, I'm trying to estimate the infrastructure capital loss due to flooding and sea level rise, but I'm going to account for investment dynamics. I'm going to consider regional building capital growth in Indonesia, accounting for the existing climate risk because of flood and sea level rise, and the regional productivity differences. And then this is going to be nested in a model, in a GE model of optimal investment. So the key mechanisms in this paper would be to think about tracing the fixed capital investment. So you want to see when the flood hits a part of Indonesia or a regency of Indonesia, how does the investment by the firm respond to that particular shock? So you could think of this as some kind of destruction. So maybe there's an act of God, flood hits some buildings, it gets destroyed. But then what matters is what happens in the forward-looking sense. So do these firms keep investing in those areas or in those buildings, or they move away from those areas? And this connects to the persistence idea. So we know that agglomeration centers are there in different parts of the world, and they tend to be very persistent. And so the firms which are located in these agglomeration centers, they tend to do a trade-off between working fundamentals. So think of Indonesia, it's going down inside water, but as a firm, I would not decide to move unless unless the benefits of moving is higher than the benefits of staying in. Which could be because of various reasons, and one of them could be because of the productivity spillovers that is there because of the other firms which are situated in around. And this is going to generate some kind of endogenous productivity differences. So to motivate the research question, you could think of this. So think of the firm productivity as a function of four components. So one is this permanent regional advantage. You could think of this as being situated near to a water body. There could be some temporal shocks, which is captured by weight and heat, but then this is the endogenous component, which is guided by the firms which are located in that piece of land. So if there are more productive firms in a piece of land, the endogenous productivity of that area would be higher. And then this epsilon is some sort of idiosyncratic shock. In this model, we can work with some sort of price. And let's take two regions, A and B, and somehow a region A is worse than region B in terms of the shocks that it experiences. So in a world with zero capital moving cost, we could have an equilibrium, which we could consider a good equilibrium here, where all the high productivity firms agglomerate in region A. But we could have the other case also, where the low productivity firms also could agglomerate in region A. And this is partly because the average number of firms, the average productivity of firms located in that region is higher. So to draw a kind of similarity, but you could think of like neighborhoods. You could have a neighborhood where there are like good schools and bad schools, and the good school neighborhood might be not the best neighborhood to live in, but people will still go there because of sending their kids to good schools. So, but in these cases, there will also be a case of multiple equilibria. So, in terms of literature, it's obviously I'm building on my shoulder of giants. So, there has been work on understanding the dynamic losses from flood and sea level rise. And I'm going to introduce incomplete depreciation and growth of capital, which is missing from this literature. In terms of persistence, there has been some work in understanding the persistence of agglomeration centers, and I'm going to add the dynamics on capital here. And finally, I'm going to add to the reduced form evidence on the impact of flooding. These are the papers by Michael Sandlin. So the steps, so there are essentially two steps. In the first step is going to have a reduced form analysis, where I'm going to see whether the flood creates any sort of destruction, I don't have to convince you that all these locations which I'm going to study here, they are the ones which will have a lot of agglomeration. So there's a lot of high value firms located there. So I'm going to show you some effects of floods on these buildings specifically. And then the next part of the project is to think about how we could think of a dynamic model here, where the firms could invest in the existing capital. So the firms are not, so it's not going to be a firm entry exit problem. It's going to be existing firms which are going to invest in their capital. And so, like mechanically, you could think of these firms are there. Now they have a choice to either move away from these locations because the fundamentals are going down, or they could stay in and keep investing in the buildings. And that's a trade-off which firm faces in these cases. So the first piece of data comes from Largest Flood Observatory. It's a global active archive of large flood events, starts in 1985. And the firm level data comes from this annual census of manufacturing plant with 20 or more workers for the period 2000 to 2012. I use other data set just to complement this analysis. It's not going to have any new fact, but it's going to complement what I already showed you with the previous data. And this is satellite data which has data on built-up cover, heights, and also the flood events. But this is only limited to the parts of Jakarta. So it mostly covered the capital of Jakarta, which is large area, 646 meters square, and divided into 2,700 spatial units. So this is the firm level results. So the estimator used here is by Charles Martin and Hortfully. The reason why I use the estimator is because an area gets affected by flood, but then it could not be affected. You can't consider it to be always treated because that area might not get affected by flood in the next period. Or you could have the other areas which might not get affected today, but they might get affected in the later years. But this estimator is robust to the switching of frequencies as well as the heterogeneous frequency. And what we would see here is so obviously the parallel trends hold at the firm level, and there is a significant loss of building value going forward. Although when we look at this so this is like a placebo test. I'm using machines which could be moved away from the farm sway. So for the machines, you could see that there is almost no change in their values, and even for the output value added employment, they tend to have no negative effects on the flood. So now, this proves all the floods in Indonesia for that period. Now I just look at one particular flood because even in these cases, what I'm trying to measure here is not it is just an intentional tree. Because I don't know if this region was affected by flood, did all the firms got affected? I don't know. It's just an intention tree. But now I focus on a flood, which is a massive flood, and most likely it would have affected all the firms. So it's the worst flood that happened in Indonesia, affected parts of Jakarta, and there was huge monetary loss. So for this, I'm going to use the synthetic differential design. I don't need to explain much because there was already a paper which was presented before on this. And we do see a sort of similar dynamics here also. So we see that before this 2007 floods, we don't see much movement, but then in 2007, and the values of the building drops, and then it quickly comes back. So it looks like that flood affects these buildings. It destroys some of the value, but then they are rebuilt quickly. And just to confirm this mechanism which I'm trying to propose here, I'm now going to zoom in into some micro regions in Jakarta, which are basically the census tracts. And so this is just so obviously I can't do a very detailed event study here because I have only 4 years of data. So I'm running a static dependent here. But the advantage here is that I have both the intensive modeling as well as extensive modeling on the flood. So I know whether the flood happened, if it did happen, what was the water level reached. So you can see that obviously the flood, it does create some loss in the building cover. And just to comment on this data is slightly different from the usual satellite products which people use on like World Settlement Footprint or DHSL. They tend to measure the positive growth usually because of the way the algorithm has been designed. But this particular data set, the remote sensing data set, is specifically designed to measure year-on-year changes. So if there's a destruction, it's going to pick that up in the data. So now what I do is I interact this flood dummy with the density of the built-up area. So you would think of that, okay, there is an area which is highly dense, it might suffer low losses. Now that could be because of two reasons. It could be because maybe the area didn't get destroyed in the flood, or the area was rebuilt quickly. So this table, it basically tells you is like, so there is definitely an effect of flood, but it tends to affect the dense area. It doesn't tend to affect the dense areas. It only affects the areas which are non-dense. And then when I rerun this specification with a quality quality, when I differentiate the buildings on their quality measure, the results tend to hold. So even the low quality buildings as well as the high quality buildings, they tend to have these effects preserved. So this is just to show that there is a destruction. So now in terms of we do see the buildings get destroyed on impact, but it looks like there is not much of a dynamic response from firms in terms of adjusting their capital investment. So what would happen is these investments will keep on happening, and eventually this is going to have, you will have much more agglomeration or much more investment in the areas which are sort of more prone to floods and sea level rise. And the capital cost of destruction because of climate change is going to increase more than what we would expect it to happen today. So for this model, so I didn't show you any investment rate sort of specification. And part of the reason is because most of these buildings and machine investments, they don't happen in a partial equilibrium, in a partial adjustment framework. So there it follows mostly like this asset model that you will see here. So this is the plant year observation. So this is a histogram of investment rate at the firm level. And you can see that more or less like 90% of the plant year observations are zero, which means most of the investments are spikes. So it happens once and then the firms tend to continue until there is some, so it has some inaction range and it has an action range. And the inaction range is not decided by just the idiosyncratic shocks. So for this framework, so we have this SS model which have been developed in macro literature. And it has been applied in my applied micro context by this paper by Hornwick and Kiniston for studying the Boston fires. And so the idea would be to, oh, sorry, I think I remove the slide because of time. So the idea would be to have productivity, and the productivity will have two components. So one will be region-specific productivity, which will be obviously guided by the firms which are located in that region, and then there will be an idiosyncratic component. And the idea would be to calibrate, not calibrate, but estimate that region level productivity using the firm level data that we already have. So that's basically the way forward for the project, and yeah, that's it. But I have 2 minutes, so if you have questions, you can ask.